I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. You could give, there's an expression among the sages, the gates of excuses are never locked. You can always come up with another excuse and another excuse and another excuse. They'll all sound beautiful. At the end of the day, you didn't redeem. You didn't do what was on your lap to do. We could say, well, no, really, God preferred Boaz. That's not Tuv's calculation. That might be true, but Tuv, from his end, if an opportunity to serve God like this came his way, literally God put him right there, he was supposed to step up to the plate. He was supposed to say, you know what, kosher, the court of Boaz is saying it's kosher. This is my responsibility for the soul of my deceased nephew, and I'm doing it, and I don't care what people say. And I'm sure we've all been in situations where you have to say, I'm going to do what's right, and I don't care what people say. If you've never been in that situation, wow, amazing. Unbelievable. But personally, I've been in that situation multiple times, and I'm sure many of you have. And yes, no, we can't be a Ploni Almoni. We have to be a Boaz. We've got to do what's right, even if it's uncomfortable, even if people are going to talk about us, even if people are going to misunderstand us, even if people are going to malign us. They do all of the above. You know, it's very interesting. There's a prayer we say in the morning blessings, where we're praying every morning. It's a Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will that we shouldn't be libeled, that we shouldn't be slandered, that we shouldn't be gossiped about, we shouldn't be maligned. And it's so interesting to me because is this so common that we have to literally pray for it every morning, like the first thing we do? And I assume the answer is yes. Yes, it is. That's why it's right there in the morning blessings. If you're going to say nothing else to God, you're going to say those 3 pages of blessing. And right away, every morning, we're beseeching God to protect us from all of that slander and malicious talk. It's
2 weeks
that
ago because I was sick. So last I was in, Ruth went to Boaz because her mother-in-law told her go and like lie down next to him or by him and then make your case. So what happened when she did that? He was receptive?
So
I missed
she
that part.
went, yeah. But you were here last week.
Yes.
Okay,
He
but
said he'd be here. He would, he
oh,
said
okay.
he would redeem her, but there's closer relatives and all that. But so she actually went and
So she
she like,
actually went. She actually thought it was really hard for her. It was really strange and difficult, this request that her mother-in-law was telling her to do, but she nullified herself, so to speak, to what her mother-in-law Naomi said. She went just like on her shoulders. I'm following orders. Makes no sense to me, but I'm following orders. She came at night. Boaz was sleeping. He was not aware. She quietly did exactly what her mother-in-law said to her. Lie down by his feet. All right, that was the end of the instructions. So she just did that. She literally just sat down by his feet and until he suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. Now, of course, some commentators, he woke up in the middle of the night to do special prayers, studying the very righteous and holy do in the middle of the night. And others, he was just like startled. He suddenly like sensed a presence and he's like, wait, is this a Shandalan? Is this a human? Is this a human form, a woman? I mean, no, what woman in the middle of night? I'm alone. Like he was alone guarding the field, which of course, as we said, made no sense. Why is he the leader of the Jewish people, the judge, and very wealthy, personally guarding his field? The whole thing was just such a God setup. But then at that point, she made her case. And we said that he had the sages praise his self-control, his restraint, that he didn't just like start cursing her. Like, who are you? What are you? What are you doing here? Get out of here. But he like controlled himself. He understood, like, obviously there was some dire situation going on. And he just like heard her and blessed her and comforted her and said he's going to do whatever he can to help her. As we discussed last week.
How in a million years is that sneeze?
So that's
if I went in the middle of the night to some man's
it doesn't sound sneeze at all. So
okay.
please do not take this as great advice you're going to give friends that are looking for a shidduch. No, no, it's not. I don't think any shotgun puts it as like, well, number 10 on the list if we're really desperate. Number 14 on the list if we're really desperate. No, it's not number 10 on the list. It's not number 14 on the list. It's not on the list. It's not. Okay. It doesn't seem sneeze at all. It doesn't seem sneeze at all. I don't recommend it. It doesn't seem sneeze at all.
Okay. All right.
I'm not gonna lie. We know that Ruth was this paragon of tznius. one of the many interpretations, and of course there were many. By the way, I do prepare and I do learn a lot before I give the class, and then I basically give over almost nothing of what I prepared. Because it's not like we're in high school and I'm going to start dissecting the words for you. But if a question comes up, at least I know some information, right? You got to prepare and then teach a little. So there are many interpretations on what made Boaz on the physical realm. Obviously, God was orchestrating, but what made Boaz notice Ruth? I mean, all the people, the poor people in the corners gathering the sheaves. Why did he even notice this one woman among everyone? I mean, she wasn't like wearing like neon red or something. How did he notice her? So there's many answers given. And a strong one is because she was so unusually modest. She bent down instead of bending over. She stood higher instead of stretching up. Like all the places where if we shift, the clothing go like this or the clothing goes like that. She was so conscious of it. And he noticed that because it was so different than all the other ladies. So we know, again, that doesn't mean any of the other interpretations are wrong. There are many things about her, obviously, he noticed, but definitely one of them was her amazing stance, her amazing modesty. And that's what I actually felt. Now, this is my feeling. I didn't read it anywhere. Could be completely wrong. But when I was studying this, I felt it was almost like God was testing her. I don't know if testing is the right word. God was putting her in a situation of like, is your service for me or is your service about you? This is my interpretation. You can totally discard it and reject it. But to me, I really felt this. She's so modest. That's her virtue. That's her, flag. And God's saying, well, if it's really about me, and that's what you have to sort of do something that doesn't seem very modest, if you do that anyway, it's because it's about me. It's not because this is your box, this is your comfort, this is what you like doing, this is what feels good. In my head, it connected very strongly to when God told Abraham to offer Yitzchak as an offering. After Abraham spent, basically his whole life, 137 some years, preaching, we don't believe in child sacrifice, when his whole embodiment was literally, he was God's kindness embodied on planet Earth, to the degree that Kabbalistically we're told the God's trait of kindness said, I'm out of business. Avram's doing it for me. So you're amazing. You're great. You're wonderful. You're unbelievable. Is it about you or is it about God? Let's create a situation where you have to be the opposite and let's see what happens. If it's about God, you still walk the road because it's about God. It doesn't make a difference what he's asking you to do. If it's about you, you can't do something so harsh. So that was how my brain interpreted this. I didn't see this written anywhere. You can feel free to throw this in the garbage. But it did seem so weird, like Yael is saying. I mean, we believe in modesty. This is a Jewish virtue. We would not tell anyone to do this, but this is a holy book. And if it happened, but it's sort of embarrassing, and it didn't have to be written here. It's a short book. It's 4 chapters. I'm sure there's many details we don't know of the story, or we only know from, Baal Peh rabbinic sources. Literally, this is written in the verses. Like, what? It's about 25% of the work is discussing this midnight meeting. So obviously, it's not something we're ashamed of. It's not something that's viewed as wrong. It's something that's viewed as right. But why would it be viewed as right? Because she did nothing wrong. Okay, we understand they were 2 religious people. They're holy people. They're godly people. We know they didn't touch each other. We get that. But it still doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem serious. Yael said, and I said, she's right. It's not. So then why would this be the road? Now, again, you could go back to what I taught earlier, which is also true and probably very much plays into this story. We discussed this at length, that a lot of points of this story is this soul coming through the back door. Why did it have to be that this soul that becomes David and ultimately becomes Mashiach himself through Moab, one of the most warped, corrupt, evil people there are? Why do we need this whole back and forth on was it a legitimate marriage? A lot of people said, Boaz said, she's a beautiful woman. And guess what? You see, he died the next morning. Even 3 generations later, David, we all know Boaz died the next morning. We've said this many times. Ruth is pregnant. That was the whole purpose. That's why God kept Boaz alive and healthy enough to father a child. Ruth has a child that's called Oved. Oved, like servant. He was a pure servant of God. So when he was born, there were people that were saying, legitimate. He was so pure and so holy. And then he had a son named Yishai. Yishai was so holy 3 generations later. This is after his father and grandfather, besides obviously his great-grandparents, Ruth and Boaz, and their product, Oved, and his product, Yishai, are all pure, holy, righteous, godly people, the holiest of the Jews. So holy that everyone accepted it must have been legitimate. Day comes and like wakes up the whole controversy again. All of which was because to get such a holy soul in this world, it has to come through those back doors. As we discussed, I remember for a long time, we brought out 2 major reasons. One reason is because we got to like sneak the soul in so the forces of evil don't realize what's happening and allow it to happen. Also because we want to extract and release the enormous potential of those sparks embedded in seemingly evil, not kosher situations. So that was a very long-winded response, but I'm saying, Yael, that's probably the true Torah response I can rely on. That this whole midnight meeting was part of that same scenario to have the forces of evil snickering and thinking we're making a fool of this great tzaddik Boaz who is viewed as the holiest Jew, and when this comes out, whoa, he's having a midnight meeting with this woman who he later conveniently marries, whoa. So that for sure must have been part of it. And I'm saying I added a little piece that's very small, but I think it was also a great expression of the sincerity of Ruth's relationship to God, that she's going to do what God needs, even when it's completely asking her to go out of her very good, holy, pure, we wished we all had such a box. So long answer, but it's a very real question.
Thank you.
Aliza, if we don't finish the chapter, it's totally your fault, not mine, by the way.
Mine.
Aliza.
Oh, I'll be really, really quick. So what clicked for the first time for me when you gave your initial answer to Yael was that I never put it together before in terms of Ruth going out of her box, in terms of her sneas, going against it in order to do the Ratzon Hashem rather than her own Ratzon. The same way that David HaMelech and the word modesty is used by his wife in accusing him of behaving in a way that's immodest for a king in how he danced and how his robe showed his legs as he danced. But David was focused on dancing for the King of Kings.
The character of the father. Wow. That's a brilliant reference. I'm just going to explain what Aliza said because she didn't give the whole backstory, but that's such a good reference point. She's going on my coattails, which might not be correct coattails, but continuing this theme of course, modesty, but ultimately it has to be about God is a number of generations later, right? David, continuing his great-grandmother's legacy, did something that, again, very different something, was how he was dancing with the return of the ark that his wife, Michal, said didn't seem modest, didn't seem appropriate, didn't seem kingly, probably the best way we would call it. It's like not chasnish, not dignified, not how a king behaves. And his point was, it's not about my honor, it's about the will of God. And that's what comes first. And if sometimes the will of God, we're supposed to be very dignified, and sometimes the will of God, we're supposed to be dancing away and like nothing about us and nothing about our dignity. It's all about celebrating God and the return of his ark. So that's
And if I may, one more point with that where Michal was coming from, she was coming from the house of Shaul. So she came from dignity. She came from a place of undisputed purity. Whereas David, who was dancing for the kavod Shemayim, the kavod of the King of Kings, he was coming from this whole apparently sordid background, when really that was the ultimate spark that could then serve Hashem. So it was also a difference in backgrounds that was necessary.
Yeah, that's amazing, Eliza. That is a great reference. All right, that was worth it. And again, Yael, it's all your fault. So we held no accountability.
Okay,
Okay,
I'll take the blame.
now you'll take the blame. We're starting chapter 4. As we said, chapter 4 is 22 verses. As we said, we sometimes do it quickly, sometimes do it slowly, and whatever. We're good. We're coming to the climax. We're coming to what happens the next morning. So in the storyline, as Yael reminded us, last night, okay, the story happens very quickly at this point. As we said, it's 4 chapters and we're moving literally quickly. Last night was chapter 3. The next morning is chapter 4, which continues that night and the next morning. That's the end of the book. Morning, at night, next morning. So last night was when Boaz is awakened in the middle of the night and sees this apparition at his feet, who turns out to be Ruth, and controls himself and comforts her and blesses her and assures her, I am not blowing you off. I will take care of this. But if we're talking about, as we discussed last week at length, the whole Yibum process, it's not me. There's Tug. He's closer in line, so I'm going to try to get him to do it. If he doesn't, you have my back. But I'm going to try for Tug because that would be the best thing. She came back early this morning. She told the story to Naomi very, very early before anyone was around to see her, but it was morning. It was light out. And Naomi said, if Boaz said he's going to do it, he's going to do it. We trust him. What did they do from then until Ruth was called to put on her veil? I assume they were praying. They couldn't have been saying songs because they weren't written yet. That's Ruth's great-grandchild. But I assume they were praying and praying and praying and praying in their own words that this should be and this should be the best and this should create this Yibum marriage and this should create this child. Did they know this child would ultimately be David in the line of redeemers? I don't think so. But they just knew that this was what they were trying to do for the soul of Machlon, was have this child. Eliza?
I'm trying to think of the best way to ask a question that I've sort of always had in the most delicate way. If this took place and the rest of the story is within a day and a half, so usually
And you have the whole process of mikvah?
Yes, when a
7
Kala
days
needs at
and all
least
that?
7 days, Shivas Nikim.
I was wondering the same thing. So I can give you all of the answers. I have no clue. I did, as I said, extensively prepare. Don't worry, I'm probably not going to share most of it, but no one raises that issue. And it was a very obvious issue in my head. So one, it seems from the way this is written, they got married that afternoon. Maybe they got married a week later. And that was just like so obvious. It wasn't even like, recorded. It doesn't give us the dates. We don't know the dates. So it seemed how it's written. Last night she came to him. This morning he goes, and by the afternoon they're married. And the next morning he's gone, and Baruch Hashem, she's carrying his seed, which ultimately creates the line of David and the Redeemer. So maybe there was a week in between, and we just don't know about it because, it's not necessary. What's only written down is what's necessary. That's one plausible fact. It doesn't say, and that afternoon they got married. That's just sort of what we would assume. But maybe that's what happened. And the other thought, according to Rambam, now Rambam and Ramban, Maimonides and Nachmanides, have a very big disagreement on originally with women and seeing blood, and the whole perspective is very different. But I'm following Rambam's approach. According to Rambam's approach to the Torah, the concept of seeing blood and becoming impure is not because blood makes us impure. I mean, you could bleed from your finger today and go into the temple. You're not impure. It's not so why is blood coming from the womb impure? Only because God decrees that blood's impure. If God doesn't decree that blood's impure, it's not impure. A little mind-bending thought, now how we normally look at it, but that's the reality of it. It's that God is saying this type of blood is impure. Blood from your fingers, blood. Blood from the womb, impurity. So within blood from the womb, there's 2 types of bleeding a woman could have biblically that could create impurity. One is the blood of her period, which in the Hebrew term is called a nida status. And one is a different type of bleeding. not when she has her period. And that's called a zava status. Originally, going back to biblical times, again, according to Maimonides, from the first day you got your period, however old you were, you started counting. Day one was the first day you got your period of your life, and you counted 7 days. Those 7 days are the days when the blood is nida, menstruation, period blood. And then you counted another 11 days, and those were zava blood. And then you counted another 7, and then you counted another 11 for the rest of your life. You got pregnant. After the baby's born, the count resumes, starting with 7 and 11 and 7 and 11 until the next child or the rest of your life. Why am I saying all this? Because of that, the concept we know of, which is we need 7 clean days, was not existent then. That might sound a little wild. We got stricter. What happened? Let me explain why. Originally, again, according to Rambam's approach, a woman could bleed for 7 days. Those are the 7 days of her period blood. She finished bleeding. That night she goes to mikvah. She went to mikvah. She's pure. Then we start the 11-day cycle. In the 11 days, she bleeds 1 day, stops. The next day she goes to mikvah. She washes it whole day, no blood. She could be with her husband that night. She bleeds 2 days, goes to mikvah that morning, watches the whole day, no blood. She could be with her husband. She bleeds 3 days. Ooh, now we have a problem. Now this becomes what's called a zava gedola. This is serious zav status. And then, whenever the bleeding stops, after this 3rd day or the next 1,000 days, whenever it stops, she needs 7 clean days before she can go to mikvah and be with her husband. Because of our whole reality and our weakening of our bodies and many other things, we don't know at any point, is this a nida blood? Is this a zava blood? So therefore, we took on ourselves, our ancestors took on ourselves, that any blood, we're just going to sort of make it a cholent to both issues, which is whenever we bleed, we need to wait 7 clean days. But that's way after the time of Ruth and Boaz. So from that perspective, that whole question really seemingly would not have been operative then. Unless she happened to have bled 3 days, she doesn't need a 7-day period. She literally needs mikvah, and that's it. But again, I don't know which answer is correct. No commentator spoke about it. I had, for some strange reason, the exact same question pop in my brain when I was preparing this, and I didn't bother thinking of an answer, but you put me on the spot, so I had to think of an answer. And those would be my 2 answers. Either version 1, there was a week that wasn't written, or version 2, which I think is more plausible, that in those days, unless she had just had a Zava Gedola status, she didn't need Shiva Nikiyim. She didn't need these 7 days. Eliza.
Both answers are beautiful, but my question is that would both answers actually assume that even not yet married and not expecting to be married, that women would have been going to the mikvah on a regular basis.
No.
No?
No. In other words, from when Ruth converted, as long as she never became a Zava Gedola, all she needed to do was go to mikvah that night before she got married. The idea of waiting 7 clean days in those days only happened if you bled 3 days in a row during your days of Zava, during those 11-day periods. Which means it is completely possible for a religious Jewish woman of the times that we're discussing in the book, never waited 7 days their whole life. Never happened to them. They never happened. Because after period blood, you go that night. The only time you waited 7 days was if you bled 3 consecutive days during the 11 days out of every 18 when you're a potential Zava. So otherwise, you never went to mikvah. Never went to mikvah. You never waited 7 days. It was a non-issue. By us, since we don't know is this Nida blood or Zava blood, we always wait 7 days. But originally, biblically, in the times we're discussing here, and which continued throughout the whole time, this was much, much later, when the women took upon themselves, since we're not sure, is it Nida, is it Zava, we just wait 7 days for everything. But originally, no, in your previous lifetimes, you could have lived your whole life as a very holy woman and never waited 7 days. All right, we're really starting chapter 4. So the next morning, I think the wedding was that night, but for sure this was the next morning. Boaz, meanwhile, had gone up to the gate and sat down there. Just then, the Redeemer, of whom Boaz had spoken, passed by. He said, "Come over, sit down here, Ploni Almoni." And he came over and sat down. That's all one verse. Long verse. So Boaz goes and sits by the gate. That's where the court met. Now again, remember, Boaz was the judge of the generation. He wasn't just very esteemed, very honorable, tzaddik, righteous, godly, holy. He was literally the spiritual leader of the Jewish people. And as we said, he was 80 years old. And he went to the gate to summon the court. Why was he summoning the court? He was summoning the court because the night before, this relative of his sort of put her problem on him. I need to do Yibum. I actually am asking you to do Yibum. Boaz is like, wait, it's not me. It's actually Tov, my uncle. But put that on the side, Boaz, as judge, needed to call the court and officially have everyone confirm and affirm that a Moabite convert can marry a Jew. That's like the preliminary step. Then we're going to get Tov to marry her. So Boaz goes to the gate, sits down, and then, totally unexpected, Tov wanders by. There's actually a beautiful midrash that says that Boaz did his part, Ruth did her part, Naomi did her part. So God said, I'm doing my part also. I'm going to send Tov right away. Because he wasn't normally hanging out there. He never was around. He wasn't part of the court. But he wandered by, coincidentally, for Boaz to rope him in. He could literally hear the court dictating, confirming, yes, this is the law. We're not making up a new law. There's no debate. We're affirming the original law, as we discussed last week, that had sort of fallen into disuse and therefore confusion, because since when is any Moabite, how none of them ever decided to convert, so it was a non-issue. But this is the original ruling. A male cannot marry a Jew, a female can. So he hears it. Literally, he hears the court saying this. Now, it's interesting because we know his name. I've said his name many times, Tov. His name is not written in the Megillah. This same Megillah that has no problem going to all the details of the midnight encounter doesn't say his name. That we don't want to say. Many reasons. Most simple and obvious is we don't want to embarrass him. We don't want to shame and really say who this person was that refused to live up to his responsibility. So he's Ploni Almoni, so-and-so. Both terms mean sort of like secret, incognito. We're not even saying his name. Though, of course, in the oral Torah, it's explained very clearly his name. So Boaz calls him over. And again, Boaz is calling over his uncle. Tov is his uncle. Remember, Elimelech, Tov, Salmon. 3 brothers. Tov, we don't know anything about his kids. No male children that were an issue here. Elimelech, Machlon and Chilion, and Salmon, Boaz. That was the whole mishpacha. That was the family. So Boaz is calling over his uncle, but he's calling him over not as giving respect to greet his uncle, but as the head of the Jews, the head of the court, the shofet, the judge, who's calling someone now into court. So Tov complies. He comes. Boaz gives him permission to sit down, otherwise you can't sit down in front of the court. He sits down. Next verse, he then took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit here, and they sat down. Boaz was doing this big public way. Now again, you don't need to convene a court of 10 elders for any of this. But Boaz wanted it to be very, very, very legit. He wanted it that no one should say, I don't know, maybe Boaz on his own decided, this whole thing seems a little hocus pocus to me. No, we're going ultra official here. We're convening 10 elders to discuss the issue. And these 10 elders are witnessing. We really need, as we're going to say here, 2 sets of witnesses. Transaction of the land, transaction of the marriage. We want this all to be very, very public. Very, very in the know. So no one, when they want to start talking, which of course people like to do that, still will. But at least the truth will be very solid on the other side. Then he said to the Redeemer, he means Boaz, is talking to the potential Redeemer, Ruth, the one that should be the Redeemer because he's first in line, as we discussed last week at length. In those days, it wasn't just a brother, it would be the closest male relative, which would go until a cousin. So ideally a brother, if there's no brother, a father, an uncle, a cousin, all on the male line, all in the male family. So he says to the Redeemer, who is the potential Redeemer, is the only one left at besides Boaz himself, the parcel of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech is being offered for sale by Naomi, who has returned from the fields of Moab. So let's talk a little family history here too. I mean, we are related. My grandfather, your father, had this land. Now, again, this was a very honorable, rich family. This was a very illustrious family. You know who that grandfather was? Nachshon. If you've heard of Nachshon ben Aminadav, the Jew that walked into the waters and the waters split for the entire Jewish people, that was that Nachshon. He's the grandfather we're talking about here. So when you think about that and the ages and how Nachshon to Solomon to Boaz were 300 years later, it's like, wow, there was a lot of blessings here, but enormous longevity on some people's parts. But Nachshon, who had 3 sons, his lands got divided among these 3 sons. Solomon got a portion, Tub got a portion, Elimelech got a portion. So it's like in the family. Well, now Naomi came back and she's really poor. So she's going to do what we really don't like doing, which is sell these ancestral lands. No one has dibs to them besides her because they had 2 sons, they're gone. Their sons had no children. So the owner of the lands is Naomi, but actually, since Machlon's wife is alive, it's really like 50% Naomi's and 50% Ruth's. That's really how we would divide this land. But they're very poor. So they're going to put it on the market. But before they do so, as relatives, we want to be the redeemers. Will you redeem this land? Maybe she can sell it on the market. But it's right adjacent to your lands. My land, your lands, and their lands are all adjacent to each other. And we want it to stay in the family. And also because you're redeeming the land, you'll be very generous. You know, you have a lot of money. This was a very wealthy family. I mean, Elimelech lost all of his because of God's punishment, but this is a very wealthy family. So you cannot just buy the true value of the land, which would be a nice amount of money. You can be even more generous, and they're very impoverished. So will you do this? Will you be the redeemer for the lands instead of Naomi putting it on the market? She could put it on the market. It will sell. She'll get money. But we want it to stay in the family. This way it stays in the family. It's adjacent to your lands. And you can be even more generous because it's not just a business deal. You're being the redeemer. Will you do this? Boaz continued to say, I resolve that I should inform you to this effect. Buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you are willing to redeem, redeem. You're willing to do it? Good. Go for it. But if it will not be redeemed, tell me that I may know that there is no one else to redeem it but you and I after you. And he said, I'm willing to redeem it. Okay. Tov said, I'll go for this mitzvah. I'll go for this good deed. We want to keep the lands in the family. I'm all for that. I have the money for this. Not a big deal for me. And I can be generous and I'll give them more than its fair market value and the lands will stay in the family and all is good. And I'm so happy that I could do my mitzvah of the day. But then Boaz continues. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the fields from Naomi, you also must buy it from Ruth the Moabite. We're not making pretend. I want you to know the story. The Moabite, wife of the deceased, to perpetuate the name of the deceased on his inheritance, to marry her, to have a child that will perpetuate that name. So Boaz, like he sort of started like, the situation, Nebuch, they're so poor. If we wanted to stay in the family, our family, you have the money for it, you can be generous. Tov was like, of course, I'm going to be so generous. Do this good deed, of course, for the family's sake. Then Boaz says, good. Well, actually, it's a package deal. There's two things you need to be as the redeemer. You need to redeem the land, and you need to redeem the soul of Machlon. To redeem the soul of Machlon, you have to marry his widow. Ruth, what you just heard, God sent you here fortuitously. You just heard the court convene, and the court proclaimed, not a shtetl, not some new idea we came up with. We affirmed that this was the original law, that a convert from Moab, we do not marry the males, and we marry the females. So I'm telling you, Ruth is from Moab. I don't want you to say you didn't know the story. She's a convert, and she's from Moab, and you just heard the court say, the highest court of the land, my court, which is the highest court of the land, say it's completely kosher to marry a Moabite convert. So will you be the redeemer for both issues? Because it's a package deal. You can't redeem the land without redeeming the soul of Machlon. I'm putting it as 2 for 1. Pay for the lands, marry Ruth, you'll have a child who will redeem the soul of Machlon, and then you'll be a double redeemer. And if you're not going to be a double redeemer, you can't be a redeemer at all. And the redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I imperil my own inheritance. Take over my redemption responsibilities on yourself. Boaz, my nephew, Machlon's cousin, you pick up the plate, for I am unable to redeem. So Tov dropped the ball. Tov said, I can't do it. No way. I don't want to imperil my children by marrying a Moabite convert. Now, there's a lot of ways to understand what's going on here, and why did he say no? I mean, some say, if you want to give him the ultimate benefit of the doubt, he was already married and his wife wouldn't want him to take a second wife. Okay, that's charitable. It's a nice interpretation, though it doesn't really jive with the words of the verse at all. But if you're looking at the words, he's saying, I can't marry her because I can't imperil my own children, which implies I can't marry her. No, you're not allowed to. I mean, did you ever read the Chumash? You're not allowed to marry a Moabite convert. She's wonderful. She's righteous. She's religious. I hear she's an amazing person. She stuck with Naomi this whole time. Accolades to her. But I can't marry her. I don't want to tarnish my own line. That's what he seems to be saying. And according to some, that is what he's saying. But it's a little bizarre. It's a little bizarre because, first of all, he just was there when he heard the court saying you're allowed to marry a Moabite convert. And also, if he really believes you're not allowed to marry a Moabite convert, what's he telling Boaz? You do it, not me. If it's treif for Boaz the same way it's treif for Tov. If it's kosher for Boaz, it's kosher for Tov. Again, it's an obvious question, and there's a lot of different ways it's understood. Some say he just was simple, and he wasn't really following what the court was saying, and he thought it's forbidden, but Boaz knows more. If Boaz is saying it's kosher, go for it. But, in his simple mind, it's forbidden. That's one interpretation. Others say he heard the court. He understood the court. It's not so complex what the court was saying. Originally, a Moabite woman was always allowed to marry a Jewish man if she converted legally. Clear. But we haven't done this for 300 years. We never did it, because from the beginning of time, and since the 300 years we've been in Israel, no Moabite woman convert actually ever appeared on the scene. So Tov understood, yes, the law says this. Yes, the court of Boaz, the highest court of the land, is affirming this is the truth of Torah. I believe it. I buy it. I know it. But I'm smart enough. I've been around long enough. I'm an old man. I mean, imagine Boaz was 80. I've been around long enough to know that for sure people are going to talk. People are going to dispute the legitimacy of this marriage. And Tov was saying, Boaz, I don't have the shoulders for this one. Me, I'm nobody. I'm a simple guy. I come from a nice lineage. I have good yichus, illustrious lineage. I have good money. I'm a reputable person, but I'm no Torah genius. I'm no leader of the generation person. On my shoulders, I'm going to be here. Everyone's going to knock me not the children that come from this marriage. And I won't have the wherewithal to respond. Who am I? I'm a nobody. I can't do it. I can't imperil my children. Imperil my children, I think they're not going to be legit. I trust the court. I know they're legit. But they won't be legitimate. And I will have nothing to say. You, Boaz, I think you should do this. I think you should do this because it's forbidden. I don't want to do forbidden, so you do what's forbidden. I think you should do this because you're the leader of the generation. You're the judge. You have the backbone, have the knowledge of Torah, have the authority of Torah, that if someone wants to question the legitimacy of your children, you'll be able to stand up. Your credibility, your knowledge, your presence, who you are, what you represent, people won't talk. And if they talk, you'll be able to knock them down because you know the truth of Torah. But me, I don't have the shoulders for it. So I'm not saying it's forbidden because I think you should do it. But I know I can't do it. And probably many, many other ways of understanding what he was thinking. What did he mean? But still, as we're saying, whatever his justified, unjustified reasons, it's not viewed favorably. It's not viewed, yeah, he's a good guy, and he's right. He's got another wife. Well, you got to take that in consideration. Well, if people did question the legitimacy of the marriage, as of course they did, I mean, what's Tuv going to say? Tuv doesn't know anything anyway. People actually say one of the reasons we say Ploni Almoni, like so-and-so, instead of his name, is because his name means good. And he wasn't behaving as per his name. He didn't live up to his name here. He wasn't Mr. Good here. So even though we can understand him and understand this would seem a bit risky, even though the court said it's kosher, but it still might not seem kosher, might not appear kosher, and he doesn't really want to be mixed up in things that don't seem and appear kosher because he doesn't need to be the target of all this gossip, and he'd have nothing to respond to all this back talk. I hear what you're saying, I hear what you're saying, I hear what you're saying. You could give, there's an expression in Hebrew among the sages, the gates of excuses are never locked. You can always come up with another excuse and another excuse and another excuse. They'll all sound beautiful. At the end of the day, you didn't redeem. You didn't do what was on your lap to do. We could say, well, no, really, God preferred Boaz. That's not Tuv's calculation. That might be true, but Tuv, from his end, if an opportunity to serve God like this came his way, literally God put him right there, he was supposed to step up to the plate. He was supposed to say, you know what, kosher, the court of Boaz is saying it's kosher, this is my responsibility for the soul of my deceased nephew, and I'm doing it, and I don't care what people say. And I'm sure we've all been in situations where we have to say, I'm going to do what's right, and I don't care what people say. If you've never been in that situation, wow, amazing. Unbelievable. But personally, I've been in that situation multiple times, and I'm sure many of you have. And yes, no, we can't be a Ploni Almoni. We have to be a Boaz. We've got to do what's right, even if it's uncomfortable, even if people are going to talk about us, even if people are going to misunderstand us, even if people are going to malign us. They do all of the above. It's very interesting. There's a prayer we say in the morning blessings, where we're praying every morning. It's a Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will that we shouldn't be libeled, that we shouldn't be slandered, that we shouldn't be gossiped about, we shouldn't be maligned. And it's so interesting to me because is this so common that we have to literally pray for it every morning, like the first thing we do? And I assume the answer is yes. Yes, it is. That's why it's right there in the morning blessings. If you're going to say nothing else to God, you're going to say those 3 pages of blessing. And right away, every morning, we're beseeching God to protect us from all of that slander and malicious talk. It's that common. So to fail, and Boaz stepped up to the plate, and we are going to finish this next week. Thank you so much.